Hello, and today we're going to be doing something quite simple. If you've read either the, title or thumbnail, which is probably on there, I haven't made it yet, so I don't know. And today basically we're just going to be looking at what tyre compound is actually the best for Forza Horizon 5, considering that the game is going to be replaced in 3 weeks. A bit less than that actually, it's about 2 weeks if you pre-order and then 3 weeks if not, because I've got it marked down somewhere. And basically this is going to form part of what I'm going to dub as the ultimate guide. So I'm going to make a bunch of videos on Horizon 5 and just a general all-purpose guide for people who jump back into the game either the first time or back into it after Horizon 6 comes out, and people who want to revisit, as I think it just might be helpful generally, and people don't run into that kind of wall of I need this information, I can't find it, which tends to happen when games start to get shuttered. But anyway, yeah, so this is just on what tyre compound is actually the best, and to go through what my brother would probably call the methodology of it, I took 4 different tracks, being the Reservoir Sprint, the Horizon Mexico Circuit, the Tulum Trail, and the Mangrove Scramble. So I took every tyre compound and ran it through the regular asphalt races, and then for the dirt races I took the more effective compounds, the ones that had the highest grip rating, and just ranked those with the exception of drift tyres. This is partially because of time and also partially because I didn't want to run stock tyres, vintage white walls, drag, street, vintage race tyres. I would have driven myself insane because this already took hours to record on and test all the footage for, so yeah, that wasn't fun. But yeah, overall we've just been sat testing. I had to set up new events for all of these in order to test them in the wet, because when I played the game it was winter in the dry season, so I didn't actually get them wet, and I think that Rivals sets it automatically to be in the dry and summer anyway, so I wouldn't have been able to test them in the wet otherwise. So other than that, I'm just going to jump straight into it in a minute when I've come back from just quickly editing this down, because I have messed up this recording about 7 times now and I'm getting sick of re-recording it, so I'm going to go and check it all through now. After recording the intro and exporting it, I realised that I missed something extremely important. So I did all of this testing in a Pontiac Firebird 68, which I set to 500 brake horsepower. The reason that I did this is because it has access to all tyre compounds, and also because I just like the cars, so I thought I may as well use it for a video, why not? But yeah, I'm gonna have to chuck this in somewhere in the editing track before I forget. So I took the Reservoir Sprint as the first track to do because, to put it simply, it was next to the festival, and it's also got a good amount of high speed and low speed turning, which is always good for a test. So the first thing that I did was test the stock tyre compound on this in the dry. I did these ones where I did all the dry compound races and then all the wet compound races. So the first one ended up being stock, which obviously had the worst time. It came up to a 2:46.292, which was markedly worse than the next one down, so I'm not going to speak too much about it. The next one down though was white wall, vintage white wall tyres, which they still weren't amazing. You still very much couldn't put your foot down fully in a 500 brake horsepower vehicle just because it would slip out immediately, and this was generally consistent for most of the next ones actually. Drag racing less so, and it ended up actually being a lot faster than the vintage white wall despite being a drag racing compound, because a lot of the grip is focused on straight line speeds, especially in that early section of the track that you probably saw a minute ago. It was a lot faster to get off. The next thing to note though is that there were kind of bands for how fast a tyre compound will be in a way. So generally speaking, I've done this in order of grip. So the game, when you select a tyre compound, has a grip modifier that's visible on the screen. I've used that as an indicator for the order. So I started with stock and worked my way up to slicks. There are kind of bands that I noticed as I kept recording. So the first band was between the stock and drag tyre compounds, where they would be markedly slower, especially in the wet. They were all grouped a lot closer together. The next band was between street and off-road racing tyres, which would generally come in this case on the Reservoir Sprint, between 32 and 31 seconds. Then the next band would be sport to off-road tyres, which would all came around at 2 minutes and 27 seconds in the dry, and then semi-slicks and slicks were obviously off in their own league. But other than that, moving down to street tyres after this sort of band system, this is where you start to see that I was able to put more power into the turns and that I was getting less afraid of putting the foot down all the way rather than having to ease my way through turns, just purely because I was able to find myself gripping a lot easier to the track, so the back end wasn't coming out nearly as much. Interestingly enough, I found that vintage racing tyres were actually a little bit faster in this case than street tyres. And I also found that they were basically faster than anything up until sport, which might have just been my driving, or it might have been something else. I did all of this in one run, I did one take. I didn't get any retries, I didn't give myself any reruns, unless I screwed up a corner. I did a clean run on the first try. I only restarted, I think, about 3 times for all of the things that I tested. But what you're here to know, what's the fastest? Generally speaking, if you want to stay within A class, fastest tyre compound that I've found is sport tyres and also off-road tyres. If you want to stay at the bottom end so that you can get more power out, then probably vintage race or also still sport tyres would probably be the fastest. If you're not as bothered or want to run a higher power build, then semi-slicks or slicks, as they were the fastest overall, with semi-slicks coming in at 222.860 and slicks coming in at 222.943. And that's for the dry. For the wet, the results were generally the same. The stock tyres actually only had a 400 millisecond difference between wet and dry, but the vintage white ball and drag tyres were both over 2 minutes and 40, where they were below it before. And other than that, generally speaking, there was 3-ish seconds added on to each time when it was in the wet compared to in the dry. So semi-slicks were 226 instead of 222. Sport tyres were 231 instead of 227. Drag tyres were 241 instead of 233. So there was generally a trend of when they would get to being in the wet instead of being in the dry, there'll be an additional 5 seconds, well, 4 to 5 seconds tacked on due to the change in weather conditions, also partially due to my driving most likely. But yeah, and then I'm going to take a quick break and then I'm going to jump into the asphalt circuit race, which is the Horizon Mexico circuit. So yeah. So next is the asphalt circuit race, which is the Horizon Mexico circuit. So I picked this one as, one, it's probably the most played circuit in the game, so it's a good litmus test, and 2, it's, again, next to the festival, so it's easy to change my cars. Anyway, enough about that, more about the times. So once again, in the dry, the stock compound was markedly slower than everything else, and it once again followed roughly the same trends as last time. So there was kind of a block of 3 which had roughly similar times, then there was another block in the middle. Looking at the times, compared to the street tyres as well as the off-road racing tyres, the vintage race tyres once again came out on top. They were a 1.5 seconds faster than street tyres in the dry, and nearly 3 seconds faster in the wet. So it does seem to be at the minute that on the asphalt, you have a very clear chance of doing well if you're on maybe a lower power build to kick it into B class and you're trying to run with vintage racing tyres. They seem to perform extremely well in my case. Moving on to slightly better tyres, meaning that kind of third bracket where it's between sport and semi-slicks. The fastest here were naturally sport tyres, with drift and off-road tyres coming next. That was in the dry. But interestingly enough, in the wet, the off-road tyres actually performed a hell of a lot better. And the drift tyres even performed better than sport tyres in that case, which honestly surprised me because as well, the vintage race tyres actually nearly outperformed the sport tyres, which honestly is quite impressive. As well, the final result, the one that you've all been waiting for, is the slicks and semi-slicks, which they're the fastest too, obviously. But in this case, the semi-slicks were slower in the dry, with the slicks getting a 1:12.039, and the semi-slicks also actually beating them out in the wet, where the semi-slicks had a 1:13 time and the slicks had a 1:14 time. And yeah, I mean, the thing is, with these bands, once again, it had a similar kind of trend to the sprint race, where I was able to put more power in the higher end of compounds, which led to faster times. And again, this is the case between sort of vintage race and everything else, where they seem to be kind of an anomaly compared to all the other tyres with similar grip. Even street tyres, which are right next to them, they would still consistently outperform street tyres by at least 1.5 seconds, even in dry conditions. So it seems like, from my testing, if you want to do asphalt racing, generally speaking, unless you're in the wet, and you want the best performance, go with slicks. If you're trying to target a build a bit lower PI, go with vintage race, or sport is also not a bad option, although it is a decent amount ahead in PI if I remember correctly. But yeah, other than that, I mean, there's not much else to honestly say about the Mexico circuit, considering that it's very similar results to the sprint that I've just done. So yeah, we'll just, I guess, leave that there. And next is actually the off-road circuit, so I should have more to say about it. I lied. I said that the next one was going to be an off-road circuit race, but it's not. It's the Tulum Trail. It's a trail race. I am going to do the off-road circuit race, but that's next. Anyway, as I alluded to earlier, I didn't test every tyre compound on off-road races on dry or wet at all. The only compounds I really tested were snow tyres and up, with the exception of drift tyres, which I didn't think would be particularly viable, so I just cut them. And I've kind of tested this before. I've used various tyre compounds myself in various builds, and these are the only ones that seem to be really viable, at least to me. So let's get into that. In the dry and the wet, there was a clear trend with this, and it's an unsurprising trend, to be honest. Off-road race and off-road tyre compounds were the fastest. This is unsurprising, I know. They were ultimately just winning out every single time. One thing that I will take into account is that my Pontiac was RWD. I didn't change the tune for off-roading, you would normally, and that definitely had an effect, but it was for the sake of consistency more than anything. Just to give you an idea, the snow tyres were the worst, 3:13 time in the dry and a 3:21 time in the wet. The off-road race tyres got a 3:05 time in the dry and a 3:08 in the wet, and then the next tyre compound to do anywhere near that was in fact the off-road tyre compound, which got a 3:04 in the dry and a 3:11 in the wet. So there was a bit of back and forth between the two. But other than that, I once again found that semi-slicks were a lot faster than slicks in this case, where semi-slicks were 3:06 and slicks were 3:09. And the difference usually ended up being around 3 seconds per tyre compound regardless. And then in this case, it's quite simple. Snow tyres were the worst, and generally it's a toss-up between off-road race and off-road. I mean, if you're going for the off-road race compound due to the lower PI, it's not actually that much of a difference to the point where you're going to lose significantly more. In the dry testing, the difference was literally 400 milliseconds in this test, and in the wet conditions it was actually slightly faster, although that may be due to me driving rather than the actual tyre compound being faster. Other than that, like I said, there's not much to actually say about it. I'll have probably more to talk about in the next one, considering that it's going to be a bit more comparative. But yeah, other than that, let's just jump straight into the next one, which I promise this one's actually a circuit this time. And yeah, the Mangrove Scramble is finally here, so this just ties everything off in a bow a little bit, where we've now got a off-road circuit race, because I thought I'd follow the same trend, because I was originally just going to do asphalt races, and then I've decided to go and do the off-road ones as well. So it's a very similar trend in this one compared to the others. So snow tyres are naturally worse, where in both conditions they got a 1:30, and the off-road racing tyres, they managed to score a 1:25 in the dry and a 1:26 in the wet, and compared to their other clear competitor, the off-road tyres, which also actually were faster in the dry at 1:25.1, they were actually a second slower in the wet at 1:27. Besides that, once again, the semi-slicks, they were maybe a second slower. They seemed to be around a second and a half slower regardless in the wet, and maybe 2 seconds in the dry, which, I mean, there isn't really much to say about it, to be honest. It's mainly just that the tyres were exactly what you would expect for off-road, but to compare them to the Tulum Trail, the trend is pretty much the same. I mean, in this case, the gap was actually a little bit narrower between the semi-slicks and the off-road tyre compound, which I was actually mildly surprised about, because I always thought that the semi-slicks would be absolutely useless, but it seems that on tracks which have, because they are mixed surface tracks, there is asphalt sections, so it seems that in tracks where there's larger sections of asphalt, they do a lot comparatively better than in sections where there's lower ones. But, you know, that depends on the circuit. So generally speaking, once again, you want to do an off-road circuit race, off-road racing tyres or off-road tyres. In this case I'd probably say off-road racing if it's a little bit more heavy on the asphalt, because it means you get a little bit of the semi-slick bonus and you get a little bit of the grip that you get from the off-road tyres. But once again, AWD, not a thing. This was a rear-wheel drive build, and so yeah. But other than that, I mean, I think I'm just going to wrap this up, because honestly I don't know what else to say. And all is done really. I mean, we've tested all the compounds, I've explained the process of it, I've explained everything about the times. I mean, I will throw up my spreadsheet with all the times on it now and all of the information that I've got, because I will have it in one spreadsheet which I've got in front of me while recording this, so I can read out the times and such, and so I can kind of monitor everything from here. And honestly, this was a not fun thing to record, but it was interesting. I've always wanted to do something like this where I just see what's the best generally. And while there's definitely people who could add to this, and there's people who would spend a hell of a lot more time on this, I have a life at the end of the day and I have other things I want to do. And so this is just the best that I can physically get with the time that I have and what I can do. So yeah, I mean, other than that, again, I've thrown up the spreadsheet on screen so you can see all the times, which ignore the, if I forget, the green parts on it, that's just what I've recorded so I can keep track. But other than that, yeah, I mean, there's potentially a new video coming next month about a different racing game. I will probably cover Horizon 6 when I can get space on my Xbox, because I have no space on there at the minute, so I'm trying to finish some games in the next 2 weeks. And yeah, it'll either be Horizon 6 or it'll be a different game that I've been playing, which at this point is just racing games, because let's be real, look at this channel, it's just racing games. I may as well lean into it. And yeah, I mean, other than that, have a wonderful day and do the YouTube stuff.